The emergency klaxons have been wailing for so long that Commander Ilara Kane barely registered them anymore. She stood in the command center of Outpost Vega, the last human military installation this side of the Orion Arm, watching as yet another distress signal appeared on the tactical display. "That's the Hermes, ma'am," Lieutenant Kruz reported, his voice flat with resignation. Arcturus forces intercepted her at the Tarsus relay. No survivors. Kane nodded silently. The Hermes made 17 human vessels lost this month alone. At this rate, there wouldn't be much of a fleet left to defend Earth when the Arcturus Empire finally decided to launch their main offensive. "How many souls aboard?" she asked, though she already knew the answer would hurt. 235, Commander. The Arcturus Empire had appeared at the edges of human space 8 months ago. They came with ships of impossible design, vessels that seemed to bend physics to their will with crystalline hulls that absorbed energy weapons and propulsion systems that left human scientists baffled. Their weapons cut through the best human shields like they weren't there, and their targeting systems never missed. First contact had been brief. Surrender or be eliminated as a potential future threat to galactic order. Humanity, true to form, had chosen neither option. "Commander," a new voice interrupted her thoughts. Dr. Emerson Way, head of R&D for this sector, stood at the entrance to the command center. His usual pristine lab coat was wrinkled, and dark circles shadowed his eyes. "I need to speak with you immediately, privately." Kane followed Way to his lab, a chaotic space filled with holographic displays and half-assembled prototypes. The scientist tapped a few commands into his console, and a secure connection established. "What I'm about to show you is classified beyond your current clearance," Way said, "but circumstances have forced my hand." The display shifted to show what appeared to be a shipyard hidden within an asteroid. At the center floated a vessel unlike any Kane had ever seen. It was smaller than a standard destroyer but shaped all wrong, asymmetrical, with sections that seemed unfinished and others that bulged with strange protrusions. Its hull was matte black, absorbing light rather than reflecting it, creating an unsettling silhouette that was difficult for the eye to track. "What am I looking at, Doctor?" "Project Nightmare," Way answered. "An experimental warship developed in secret after our first encounters with the Arcturus. It's unconventional." "Unconventional how?" Way hesitated. "The Arcturus ships operate on perfect mathematical principles. Their systems predict standard combat responses with 99.998% accuracy. So we built something that defies prediction. A ship that shouldn't work, but does." "That's impossible," Kane said, studying the bizarre vessel more carefully. "Not impossible, just ill-advised," Way corrected. "Its systems are designed to be unpredictable, sometimes even to its crew. Its weapons discharge at irregular intervals. Its engines operate on probability matrices rather than direct commands. Even its hull configuration changes subtly during combat." "You're telling me we built a ship that doesn't follow orders?" "No. It follows orders, just not in ways that can be mathematically predicted. And that's precisely why the Arcturus targeting systems can't lock onto it effectively." Way swiped to another image showing test results. In simulations, it survives 400% longer against Arcturus weapons than any other vessel in our fleet. Kane stared at the data, a desperate hope rising in her chest. "Where is it now?" "That's the problem. After the last test, Command ordered it decommissioned. They called it too dangerous, too unpredictable. The risk to its own crew was deemed unacceptable." Way looked Kane directly in the eyes. "It's currently at Outpost Rhea, scheduled for dismantling in 3 days." Kane's mind raced. Outpost Rhea was only 16 hours away at maximum burn. Who was the test pilot? That would be Captain Alexei Novak. Brilliant pilot, but after 3 weeks aboard Nightmare, he's currently in psychiatric evaluation. The ship, it affects people. How? Extended exposure to its operating systems causes increased paranoia, hallucinations, and in some cases, euphoric addiction to the ship's irregular feedback patterns. It's like the human brain tries to find patterns where none exist until it starts creating them. Kane turned away, her reflection distorted in a glass panel. The situation was desperate enough that Command had just authorized a last-ditch defense plan that amounted to a suicide mission for half the remaining fleet, if this nightmare vessel could even marginally improve their odds. Dr. Wei, I'm requisitioning Project Nightmare effective immediately. We looked alarmed. Commander, I'm not sure you understand the risks. I understand that we're losing this war, Doctor. I understand that at current casualty rates, humanity has approximately 6 weeks before we no longer have the resources to mount any defense at all. She straightened her uniform. Prepare the necessary documentation. I'll need a crew, volunteers only, and a full briefing on the ship's capabilities. Command will court-martial you for this, Wei warned. Only if we survive, Kane replied. Outpost Rhea hung in the shadow of Saturn, its utilitarian structure a sharp contrast to the ringed beauty of the gas giant. Kane's requisition shuttle docked with minimal authorization checks. The outpost was operating on a skeleton crew with most personnel reassigned to more critical installations. She had brought only 4 people with her, each selected for very specific skills. Lieutenant Cruz, her tactical officer, whose intuitive approach to combat had often been criticized as reckless in his performance reviews. Dr. Maizong, a brilliant systems engineer with synesthesia who could see patterns in code that others missed. Chief Petty Officer Jackson, a mechanic with an almost supernatural ability to fix things that should be beyond repair. And finally, Lieutenant Commander Rashid, a pilot whose flight instructors had noted his disturbing ability to think like the machine rather than fly it. They found Project Nightmare exactly where Wei's coordinates indicated, floating in a secure dock with most of its systems powered down. Up close, the ship looked even more wrong, its hull seeming to absorb scanning beams rather than return them, creating a visual distortion that made Kane's eyes water if she stared too long. That's one ugly ship, Jackson commented, whistling low. Beauty isn't part of its design parameters, Kane replied. Survival is. They boarded through a standard airlock that led to an interior as disorienting as the exterior. Corridors branched at irregular angles. Control panels were positioned at heights that required either stretching or stooping. And everywhere, surfaces were covered in a material that gave slightly under pressure, creating the unsettling sensation of walking on something alive. The bridge should be this way, Kane said, consulting the schematics Wei had provided. Should be, Cruz asked. The internal layout shifts subtly during operation, Kane explained, part of its unpredictability matrix. They found what passed for a bridge, a circular chamber with workstations arranged in what appeared to be random positions, rather than the standard configuration. At the center was the captain's station, surrounded by displays that showed not just standard tactical information, but abstract representations of data that Kane couldn't immediately interpret. Dr. Zhang, see if you can bring core systems online, Kane ordered. Jackson, engineering needs assessment. Cruz, weapons inventory. Rashid, familiarize yourself with the helm. As her team dispersed, Kane approached the captain's station cautiously. The seat adjusted as she sat, conforming to her body in a way that felt both comfortable and vaguely intrusive. Commander, Zhang called from her station. I'm having trouble interfacing with the main computer. It's responding before I complete my commands. It's predictive, Kane explained, recalling Wei's briefing. Sometimes too predictive. Try varying your input patterns randomly. Zhang nodded skeptically, but tried again. This time the systems responded, displays illuminating throughout the bridge. Fascinating, Zhang murmured. It's like it's learning from my frustration. Over the next 3 hours, they'd brought Nightmare to life. Each system presented its own challenges. Weapons that charged at variable rates, engines that provided different thrust, depending on how they were engaged, sensors that sometimes detected objects that weren't there and other times missed objects that were. This ship is a death trap, Cruz declared after his third attempt to calibrate the targeting systems. No, Rashid countered, hands dancing across his console. It's brilliant. The helm responds to intention as much as command. Watch. He input a standard evasive maneuver, but the ship executed a completely different pattern while achieving the same end position. How is that useful? Cruz demanded. Because no one can predict which of 50 possible paths I'll take to get to the same destination, Rashid explained, a hint of excitement in his voice. The ship doesn't just respond to my commands, it interprets them. Kane was about to respond when the proximity alarm sounded. John looked up from her station, eyes wide. Commander, we have multiple contacts. Arcturus signatures. Here. How did they find us? Unknown, but they're on an intercept course. 3 vessels, cruiser class. Kane made her decision. Rashid, can you fly this thing? The pilot grinned. I'm starting to think it might be flying me, but yes. Then take us out. Jackson, our engine's operational. Jackson's voice came over the comm. Operational is a strong word, Commander, but they'll move us. Cruz, weapons status. Armed, I think. Hard to tell with these systems. Kane settled into the captain's chair, feeling the strange material adjust around her. All hands, prepare for combat. Let's see what Nightmare can do. The ship disengaged from the dock with a shudder that ran through the hull like a living thing stretching after a long sleep. On the tactical display, the 3 Arcturus cruisers adjusted their approach, their formations mathematically perfect. They're locking weapons, Cruz reported. Evasive maneuvers, Kane ordered. Rashid didn't respond verbally. Instead, his hands danced across the console, and Nightmare moved, not in any standard evasive pattern, but in a chaotic, unpredictable spiral that made Kane's stomach lurch. The inertial dampers struggled to compensate, creating pockets of varying gravity throughout the ship. The Arcturus vessels fired. Brilliant beams of energy that had cut so many human ships to pieces. But where they should have struck, Nightmare wasn't there. Not because it was faster, but because it was where no logical combat algorithm would expect it to be. Return fire, Kane ordered. Cruz hesitated. Targeting solutions are unstable. This ship doesn't use targeting solutions, Lieutenant. It uses probability fields. Just designate the target and let the system do the rest. Cruz did as ordered, and Nightmare's weapons discharge, not in the coordinated volley that military doctrine demanded, but in a stuttering, arrhythmic sequence that sent energy pulses cascading across unusual vectors. Most missed, but those that hit struck the Arcturus cruisers in apparently random locations. On the tactical display, Kane watched as the perfect formation of the enemy vessels faltered. Their responses seemed delayed, as if their combat systems were struggling to calculate an appropriate response to Nightmare's erratic behavior. They can't predict us, Kane realized aloud. Their entire combat doctrine is based on mathematical certainty, and we're a walking uncertainty principle. Nightmare shuddered as an Arcturus beam grazed their port side. Damage reports flashed across Kane's display, but they were surprisingly minimal. The hull absorbed most of the energy, John reported, sounding amazed. It's redistributing it to the weapons systems. Cruz, continue firing. Rashid, keep us moving. Jackson, how are the engines holding up? They're running hot, but in a good way, Jackson replied. It's like they enjoy the stress. Another exchange of fire, and one of the Arcturus cruisers suddenly broke formation, its movements becoming erratic. We've disrupted their systems somehow, Cruz reported. I'm reading power fluctuations in their main grid. Kane leaned forward. Concentrate fire on that vessel. Nightmare responded with another irregular weapons discharge. This time, multiple hits registered on the faltering cruiser. Its crystalline hull, which had repelled so many conventional attacks, cracked under the unpredictable energy patterns of Nightmare's weapons. The other 2 Arcturus vessels abruptly changed course, accelerating away from the engagement. They're retreating, Cruz said, disbelief evident in his voice. No, Kane corrected. They're regrouping. They need to reformulate their approach. She turned to the others. This is exactly what Wei theorized. Their systems can't adapt to our unpredictability fast enough. Zhang looked up from her console, face pale. Commander, I'm detecting unusual neural activity in all crew members. The ship's systems are interfacing with our brain patterns at some level. What does that mean? Cruz demanded. It means Nightmare isn't just responding to our commands, Kane said quietly. It's learning from us. And we're learning from it. She could feel it herself, a strange resonance at the back of her mind, like a melody just beyond hearing. That's why extended exposure causes psychological effects. So this ship is getting inside our heads. Jackson's voice came over the comm, sounding uneasy. More like we're getting inside its, Rashid countered, his hands still moving across his console with increasing confidence. I can almost anticipate its responses now. Not predict, anticipate. Kane studied her crew. They'd been aboard less than 12 hours, and already Nightmare was affecting them. The question was whether they could use that connection before it used them. The Arcturus vessels are coming about, Cruz reported. New formation. They're adapting. So will we, Kane said. Rashid, set course for the Tarsus relay. It's time to bring this fight to the enemy. As Nightmare accelerated away from Saturn, Kane felt the strange presence in her mind grow stronger. Part of her wanted to fight it, but another part, the part desperate to save what remained of humanity, welcomed it. Because for the first time since the Arcturus Empire had appeared on their borders, they had something the enemy couldn't predict. They had a Nightmare. The Arcturus High Command vessel, immutable logic hung in space, like a perfect crystalline thought. Its design, a series of mathematically precise geometric forms interlocking in golden ratios, reflected the Arcturus philosophy that the universe could be reduced to elegant equations. Inside its pristine command center, First Imperator Zonvex studied the holographic representation of the human vessel that had somehow survived an encounter with 3 of his cruisers. The image flickered and distorted, as if the ship itself resisted being captured even in data form. Impossible, he murmured, his 4 eyes narrowing in sequence. Run the combat simulations again. We have run them 217 times, Imperator, his second responded. The results remain inconclusive. The human vessel's behavior pattern exceeds our predictive matrices. For an Arcturus, this admission approached blasphemy. Their civilization had risen to dominance through perfect prediction, through the elegant application of mathematical principles to everything from architecture to warfare. The idea that a lesser species, humans, with their chaotic emotions and flawed logic, could create something that defied prediction was more than concerning. It was existential. What do we know of this vessel? John Vex asked. It appeared suddenly at one of their outposts. No previous record of its energy signature exists in our database. Its hull composition is similar to standard human materials, but arranged in patterns that seem to violate their own engineering principles. Most concerning. The second hesitated. Most concerning is that our weapons did not perform as calculated against it. Jean Vex felt something unfamiliar stirring in his consciousness. Not quite fear, for the Arcturus had bred such inefficient emotions out of their genetic line generations ago, but perhaps the mathematical equivalent, an uncertainty factor in an equation he had considered solved. Divert the 7th Fleet to intercept this anomaly, he ordered. I want it destroyed or captured intact for study. The existence of such unpredictability cannot be permitted. Commander Kane stood under the sonic shower in her quarters aboard Nightmare, letting the vibrations wash away 36 hours of sweat and tension. They had successfully reached the Tarsus relay after 3 more skirmishes with Arcturus patrols, each ending with the enemy retreating to recalculate their approach. But the victories had come at a cost. The ship's influence on the crew was growing stronger. Kane could feel it even now, a presence at the edges of her consciousness, whispering possibilities that shouldn't make sense, but somehow did. Rashid had stopped speaking entirely, communicating only through the ship's systems with an efficiency that was both impressive and disturbing. Zhang had begun covering her quarters with elaborate mathematical equations that she claimed represented the music the ship was making. Cruz was becoming increasingly paranoid, convinced that Nightmare was selecting targets based on some agenda of its own. And Jackson had taken to sleeping and engineering, claiming the engines got lonely when he was away. Kane herself was not immune. She found herself making decisions before consciously considering options, as if the ship were suggesting courses of action directly to her subconscious. What disturbed her most was how often those instinctive decisions proved correct. She stepped out of the shower and dressed quickly. They were approaching a critical juncture. The distress calls from across human space had changed tone in the past day. The Arcturus Empire was diverting significant forces toward their position. Nightmare had gotten their attention. The bridge was dimly lit when she arrived, the displays casting an eerie blue glow over her crew's faces. Rashid sat perfectly still at the helm, eyes half closed, fingers making small adjustments that seemed to anticipate the ship's needs before they arose. Zhang worked at her station, humming tunelessly as she monitored the increasingly complex systems. Cruz kept his attention fixed on the tactical display, where dozens of Arcturus vessels were converging on their position. "Status," Kane ordered. "They're hunting us specifically now," Cruz reported without looking up. "I count 37 vessels, including 3 command carriers. They've formed a search grid centered on our last known position. Rashid has been keeping us in the sensor shadows," Zhang added. "They haven't acquired a lock yet." Kane studied the tactical display. The Arcturus search pattern was perfect, a mathematically optimal grid that would eventually find them no matter how cleverly they hid. "Unless the ship has an idea," she said, the words coming before she'd consciously formed them. Cruz looked up sharply. "The ship doesn't have ideas, Commander. It's affecting your thinking." "Maybe," Kane acknowledged. "Or maybe it's showing us possibilities we wouldn't consider otherwise." She approached Rashid. "You feel it too, don't you? The patterns beneath the chaos." The pilot nodded without speaking, his hands dancing across the controls in what looked like random movements, but somehow conveyed perfect understanding. "What's the ship's idea?" Zhang asked, her eyes bright with an unnatural intensity. Kane pointed to the display. "They're hunting us with a perfect search grid. Perfect means predictable. If we can determine which vessel will be at this coordinate at exactly the right moment," she indicated a point at the edge of the search pattern, "we could slip past their perimeter," Cruz finished, following her logic. "No," Kane corrected. "We attack that ship specifically. They'll converge on our position, collapsing their search grid. And when they do, we'll be surrounded," Cruz protested. "Exactly where we want to be," Kane said with a certainty she couldn't explain. Cruz looked like he wanted to argue further but stopped himself. After a moment, he simply nodded. "Your orders, Commander." "Plot an intercept course for this vessel," she said, highlighting one of the Arcturus cruisers. "Prepare all weapons systems, and have Jackson ready the engines for maximum unpredictability." As her crew moved to comply, Kane settled into the captain's chair. The material seemed to embrace her more intimately than before, almost like it was eager for what was to come. The presence in her mind had grown stronger, less a whisper now than a constant companion offering insights and possibilities that danced at the edge of comprehension. "Commander," Zhang called from her station, "I've been analyzing the neural interface the ship establishes with the crew. I believe I've isolated the primary connection protocol." "Can you block it?" Kane asked. Zhang looked surprised. "Block it? No, I meant to enhance it. If we fully synchronize with the ship's systems, our reaction times would decrease by an estimated 78%. We could." "No," Kane interrupted. "We maintain distance. The ship is a tool, not a partner." Even as she said it, she felt a ripple of something like amusement from the presence in her mind. "Approaching intercept point," Rashid announced, his voice rusty from disuse. On the tactical display, The target Arcturus cruiser moved precisely along its designated search vector, unaware of Nightmare lurking just outside its sensor range. "Weapons ready," Kruz reported. "Hold position," Kane ordered. "Wait for my mark." She could feel the ship's systems tensing like muscles, its weapons charging in their irregular patterns, its hull already beginning to adapt for the coming encounter. The Arcturus cruiser drew closer, its path unwavering. Perfect. Predictable. "Now," Kane commanded. Nightmare surged forward, its engines producing thrust patterns that defied standard physics models. The ship corkscrewed toward its target in a motion that should have torn it apart, or at least incapacitated its crew with G-forces, but somehow did neither. The Arcturus vessel detected them too late. Nightmare's weapons discharged in that same stuttering, arrhythmic pattern that had proven so effective before, striking the enemy ship at seemingly random points that nevertheless caused cascade failures throughout its systems. "Direct hits," Kruz confirmed. "Their shields are fluctuating." "Keep firing," Kane ordered. "Don't give them time to adapt." Nightmare obliged, pouring energy into its bizarre attack pattern. The crystalline hull of the Arcturus vessel began to fracture along lines that no human weapon had been able to create before. "Commander," John called out, "the rest of the Arcturus fleet is responding. Multiple vessels converging on our position." "As expected," Kane replied. "Rashid, prepare for the next phase." The pilot nodded, his fingers already moving across his console in anticipation of commands not yet given. The damaged Arcturus cruiser suddenly erupted in a brilliant flash as its power core failed. Kane felt no satisfaction at the destruction, only a cold certainty that they were following the necessary path. 29 Arcturus vessels now on intercept, Kruz reported. "We'll be surrounded in 3 minutes. Hold position," Kane ordered, surprising her tactical officer. "Let them come to us." The tactical display updated as the Arcturus fleet adjusted, abandoning their search grid to converge on Nightmare's position. Their formation was shifting into a sphere, a perfect enclosure from which, by all conventional military logic, there should be no escape. "They've almost completed their encirclement," Kruz said, tension evident in his voice. "Commander, if we're going to run, now's the time." "We're not running," Kane replied. "Nightmare, initiate Protocol Alpha." The ship responded instantly, though Kane had never explicitly programmed such a protocol. Displays throughout the bridge shifted, showing new configurations and systems that hadn't been visible before. The lighting dimmed further, and the ever-present hum of the ship's systems changed pitch, dropping to a frequency that seemed to resonate in the bones rather than the ears. "What's happening?" Kruz demanded. "The ship is accessing its full capabilities," Kane explained, knowing the information even though she couldn't recall learning it. "Up to now, we've been operating with safety limiters in place." "Those limiters were there for a reason," John warned, studying her readouts with growing alarm. "Neural interface activity is increasing exponentially. If this continues, the boundary between ship and crew will become problematic." Kane felt the change already, the presence in her mind expanding, offering insights and tactical options that seemed to border on precognition. She could almost see the patterns now, the way Nightmare perceived combat as a dance of probabilities rather than a clash of forces. "All hands, prepare for full engagement," she ordered. "Kruz, target the nearest Arcturus vessel with all weapons. Rashid, on my mark, execute pattern Omega." Again, she used terminology she had never consciously learned, but her crew seemed to understand instinctively. The ship's influence was affecting them all now, creating a gestalt consciousness that operated with a weird synchronicity. The Arcturus fleet completed its encirclement. 37 vessels arranged in a perfect sphere around Nightmare, their weapons charged and targeting algorithms recalibrated based on previous encounters. "They're firing," Kruz announced. Multiple energy beams lanced toward Nightmare from all directions, a firing solution that should have been impossible to evade. "Now," Kane commanded. Rashid's hands blurred across his console, and Nightmare. shifted. There was no other word for it. The ship didn't simply move. It seemed to exist in multiple probable locations simultaneously, none of which aligned with the Arcturus firing solutions. Energy beams passed through Space Nightmare had occupied milliseconds before, or would occupy milliseconds later. At the same time, the ship's weapons discharge, not just at the nearest Arcturus vessel, but at 6 targets simultaneously, the energy patterns shifting in ways that seemed to bend around the enemy's defensive fields rather than strike them directly. 2 Arcturus vessels immediately went dark, their systems overloaded by attacks that came from vectors their defensive algorithms hadn't considered possible. A third spun out of formation, its propulsion systems failing catastrophically. How? Cruz began, but couldn't complete the thought. Kane knew the answer. Quantum uncertainty fields, she said, the knowledge flowing from the ship to her mind. Nightmare isn't just unpredictable. It actively manipulates probability during combat, creating brief windows where the laws of physics become negotiable. The implications were staggering. No wonder Command had ordered the ship decommissioned. It wasn't just dangerous. It fundamentally violated their understanding of reality. The Arcturus fleet responded to the initial losses by adjusting their formation, creating overlapping fields of fire that should have eliminated any possible escape vector. Their coordination was perfect, their adaptation speed impressive. But Nightmare was already changing too. Its whole configuration shifted subtly, absorbing and redirecting energy in patterns that confused the Arcturus targeting systems. Its weapons continued their arrhythmic discharge, striking with increasing accuracy as the ship learned from each exchange. "They're trying to establish a unified targeting grid," John reported, "linking their fire control systems to overcome our unpredictability." Kane nodded. "Just as expected. Rashid, prepare for Phase 2. The pilot was barely recognizable now, his movements so in sync with the ship that it was difficult to tell where his commands ended and Nightmare's systems began. He didn't acknowledge the order verbally, but Kane felt his understanding through the strengthening neural link.